Welcome to the Tamarind Learning Podcast, where host Dr. Kirby Ross-Plock speaks with experts on many topics relevant in the ultra-high net worth family wealth management space. Kirby is author of several books, including The Complete Family Office Handbook, and shares her expertise consulting with families and family offices. Kirby is also the founder of Tamarind Learning, an online wealth education platform that develops practical, foundational learning programs for beneficiaries to help them prepare for responsible stewardship of wealth.
In this episode of the Tamarind Learning Podcast, I welcome Kathryn McCarthy. She's an independent advisor to families and family offices, and we discuss the state of affairs in the family office industry today and the greatest hurdles facing them.
Welcome to the Tamarind Learning Podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have Kathryn McCarthy with me, who is one of the family office and family enterprise and wealth management leaders for more than 3 decades. I know she's much younger and glowing than you would never believe that, but she has literally been a luminary in our space and is someone I dearly adore, respect, and I'm so thrilled that she's here with us today because Kathryn's sat on many sides of the boardroom table for her clients. She sits on publicly traded boards, she's sat on wealth management boards, and so she's really had a catbird seat into some critical family office and wealth management arenas. So we are thrilled to have you here today, Kathryn. And Kathryn was also incredibly instrumental in the second edition of the Complete Family Office Handbook, as she was a sage and counseled and helped edit and helped bring some incredible resources to make that book so much better. So I am very indebted to her on so many levels. So Kathryn, I am excited to talk to you a little bit more today about the state of the family office. Maybe you can share your thoughts on what you think some of the greatest hurdles facing family offices today.
Well, thank you, Kirby, and congratulations on the birth of the second edition of the Family Office Handbook. And I was privileged to be working with you on that, and I'm sure it'll be a wild success at many levels. You know, it's interesting. There are a lot of hurdles that's specific to a specific family office. So when you asked the question, I thought, well, maybe the best answer would be a generic answer. And so I think that the biggest hurdle to family offices in general is the reluctance to change, or as I would say, short-term thinking. Family offices tend to be reactionary, they tend to be in the moment, but they need to look forward and they need to anticipate changes in the offices and changes in the family. Now, this is complicated by the fact that the families themselves, as I've said to you many times, you can't take family out of family office. The families themselves are probably even more reluctant to change. So I'm reminded of a quote it was actually from a book review of a reviewer at the New York Times many years ago. I don't even remember what the book was. It was about a family situation. But the quote, what I remember about the review is this quote. And the quote is, "Families are characterized by relentless inertia in the face of constant change." And that stuck with me. And it also informed me when I'm dealing with families, because I expect inertia and I expect change. And also then I expect the family offices to be subject to that environment. But planning for the future is a key challenge in every generation, and it's going to affect everything you do in a family office, assuming that you want it to last for more than one generation. That's really why I was so pleased in the second edition of your book that you devoted time to planning, and particularly to the Mattil family's case in the second chapter. You know, that case showed that over 20 years in really distinct strategic planning cycles, the family went from first generation to third generation, and they embraced change. They embraced change in leadership. They embraced change in services. They embraced a change in the generational focus of the family office in a purposeful way. And you don't, it's very hard. I give them a lot of credit for planning out their office that way, and still at the same time sticking to their day-to-day knitting. As a former CEO of a family office, another hurdle is alignment, particularly if the family itself is larger, multi-generational, and can't get aligned around the purpose and the value of the family office. So alignment is a huge challenge. It's alignment within the family, it's alignment with the family office. And many times in these situations, when there's no alignment in the family, and by default, there's not a good alignment with the family office becomes stagnant. They become disengaged from the family and their issues because they're siloed away, and they're not viewed as a resource, let alone a strategic resource. The family office cannot function effectively without a consensus on the why of the family office, and then the what, the who, and the how follows. So I go back to your book and I think it was Godspeed case in chapter 3, and that's a really good example of what I call the ossification of a family office, basically neglected, even though there was a family member there. The family just didn't really care about the office. They had no interest in the office. They had no interest in the family office's future. Luckily, they were able to come to some consensus really about closing the office because they didn't really care about it, and then move on. So I think to sum up, the biggest hurdles that family office face today and always are this reluctance to change and the difficulty of alignment both with within the family and stakeholders and with the office, and in particular in a multi-generational setting, which is what you find yourself in a family office very quickly, even if you have even if it's just a one-generational office. I think talking about the value of the office among the people in the office and with the family is really important, and talking about the long-term purpose of the office. And those are two topics that don't get discussed much. They just kind of loom. You hear a lot today about resilience and relevance. A family office that's not resilient and it lacks relevance is not a healthy environment. But those offices who plan in the long term, I think will be more resilient because it comes from the planning process. They develop this resiliency memory. And those who are aligned with their purpose, particularly the purpose of the family office, are kind of well on their way to being relevant, because purpose will allow them to discuss what's important to them, and what's important for the current generation, and then what's important for future generations. So relevance and resilience can be enhanced by alignment conversations and by planning. And if you have relevance and resilience, you've got a healthy office. I can't not mention COVID and how it's affected family offices.
I was going to ask you, so I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, you said just keep going, so I will. Interestingly, COVID has brought out a willingness to change. It may be temporary. It may be a willingness to talk about alignment a little bit, but we have people working from home. We have awareness of cyber risks and other risks that were just kind of put under the table they were not going to do that. We have new technology and new ways of communicating. And in particular, we have awareness of the needs of the staff. Kind of what's the staff's psychological moment? And that's led to really a greater effort on preparedness, which you've got to plan to be prepared, and scenario planning. Yeah. So I see a little bit of a shift there. And maybe we'll see more. So,
well, I was going to ask about your thoughts on the pandemic, because I mean, it really has become an introspective time for so many. And can be healthy. It can also be very isolationist and scary. And I would imagine that it's impacting your clients and the family offices, on so many different levels as they maybe reevaluate their investment process, or they're looking at risk controls, they're looking at redundancies, because so many family offices don't have a lot of redundancies necessarily. And now you're realizing, boy, maybe we have more exposure. I'm just curious, what other kinds of changes COVID, I love the idea that maybe it's bringing people to the table virtually, right? If they're not able to be together, but what is it doing? What has it inspired, or in some of the families that you work with, and what changes are you seeing?
Well, the families have, I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but people can't hide from meetings. It's really hard to say, oh, I'm on an airplane, I can't be on the Zoom call. So
Yeah.
I'm seeing this opening of conversation and more contact. The other thing that I've been working with one family where we're trying to help them reestablish a family office. And one of the things that I've seen is the willingness to have short meetings and then debrief and let people think and contemplate, because there is a little more time. So at the family level, there's this feeling of wanting to, they can't be together physically mostly. There's this feeling of, well, maybe we should take this time and use it well. That's on the positive side. On the negative side, I haven't seen a whole lot of negatives other than in situations where you need a lot of sidebars to get things done. You can't sidebar that easily. You can't sort of press the button and say, sorry, I got to go talk to Uncle Joe because I need a special room on the Zoom. I need a special Zoom room. So, and maybe that's the reason why lots of interaction through these shorter, more punchy, more agenda-driven conversations are really getting things done. And I'm actually seeing people get things done. As I mentioned, people are thinking more about succession planning. The mortality is certainly something that's at the higher level. Preparedness, as I said before, is really at the higher level. Documentation. I had a family member who realized that he couldn't just run into somebody's office and get information. He had them do a whole map of how things were done in the office and or now outside of the office. So there's been some very positive experiences through COVID, and knock on wood, I haven't seen anybody in an office get sick terminally, which is probably the most positive outcome of any.
For sure. I was also wondering, with sort of this transition, if there maybe are some different opportunities in terms of change. I mean, you've identified some hurdles that people have been able to address and actually start to communicate on because they've sort of found time. I do think you talk a lot about in the handbook about virtual family offices and whether this might actually trigger more offices to think we just can operate virtually. Like, we don't need to have the same physical presence that we used to have. So I'm curious what you think about what will happen post-pandemic. I'm already looking forward to those days, because I really think this time is forever changing how we operate.
Yeah, well, I've had a couple of really interesting surprises. Senior family members, in their 70s, saying we should go virtual. I was like, whoa! And these are the sort of the guys that kept everybody in the office. Everything was locked at your desk. Very suspicious of the cloud. Now they're starting to embrace this idea that even though everything was in the cloud, they just didn't want to acknowledge it. That there could be ways to work virtually. And I actually have one patriarch who could barely find his computer. He's now, I have monthly, sometimes quarterly calls, depending on his schedule with him. And he was really excited on the last call. He said, I'm going to set up the Zoom meeting next time. You don't have to do it. And it's like, really? And now he's got an office in Midtown. The lease is up. Lovely office. Lease is up in another year. And he's basically saying, do we really need this? Now, I think he doesn't fit in the WeWorks category, so that's not an option. But I think what he'll do is actually downsize the office, which he's at a stage where he doesn't need the big office anyway. And he's got 5 people working for him, and they're all communicating pretty well. So he's really thinking about changing and going to a quasi-virtual office. We'll see. I'll miss it because I loved going to see him in his office. But as long as as long as he can work on Zoom, it's fine. I think family office boards are really now under the spotlight. I have been on numbers of boards where we have quarterly meetings and we have a dinner before, the traditional dinner before, quarterly meeting, and then maybe an interim meeting on a conference call. It involves getting on airplanes. It involves weather. It involves, in some instances, overseas travel for me.
Yeah.
And that's going to change dramatically. We are finding that we can be just as effective. We don't need to be together 4 times a year, and the times we're together will be good, much more quality time. Yeah. And that going forward, I think the board management is going to be totally turned on its ear.
Yeah.
I think as long as we can have some contact with each other, we'll be fine.
Yeah.
When I think about the way investment committees are operating today, I don't see any panic. That's good. I see some downsides in, talking to managers. You really need to get in their offices to get that feel.
Yeah.
And they're smart about their pitches. So on that side, that's kind of a negative for the investment committees. But I've had many more Zoom calls between committee meetings, just tweaking the asset allocation. I mean, when we think about investment process, it's pretty much the same. Nothing has really changed. It's more education to families and about expected returns and what should they expect going forward in the future. And it's not this balanced portfolio, moderate risk, 6 to 8% returns annually. It's take it down a notch.
Yeah.
And those conversations have been really difficult. They've been actually difficult on Zoom. Anything about expectations, particularly investment expectations. The other thing that looking into the future, we've talked a lot to family members because expected returns are lower about spending policies, distribution policies. And that's been kind of hard in the COVID environment, again, because it's so personal. But I've had a few meetings and, people have resolve. They want to stick to their budgets, particularly on the family side. On the philanthropy side, lots of people are spending way beyond their budgets, their annual budgets, just because they have to, they want to address COVID. So I hope that answers your questions, kind of what's rattling around in my head about the future and how we're dealing today with what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah. Kathryn, thank you so much for talking to me today. Kathryn McCarthy was so helpful. The Mattil family was really gracious to share their story. Another anonymized case study she helped garner. So we are really lucky to have you talking here today on this Tamarind Learning podcast. And I look forward to our next time we get to see each other. Probably it might be Zoom, but, but maybe one of these days.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kirby. It's been a pleasure. And again, congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much.
Okay.